Hello, everyone. My name is Jaya Thomas, and I am the founder of Diverse Representation. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Fireside Chat. Before we get started, I want to take a quick minute and tell you a little bit about Diverse Representation for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Diverse Representation is a company focused on increasing the exposure and hiring of Black agents, attorneys, managers, and publicists working in the sports and entertainment industry. If you go to our website, www.diverserepresentation.com, we provide the first ever comprehensive directory of Black agents, attorneys, managers, and publicists in the sports and entertainment industries. And we also host various events like the one you are tuned into today. If you aren't already following us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter at DiverseRep. You can follow us on Instagram at Diverse Representation. That will probably be the most I talk all night. But just wanted to give a brief introduction about the company. To tell you a little bit more about how the format of tonight is going to work, this is a 1-hour fireside chat. The first 40 minutes, I am going to be posing questions to our guest. And the last 20 minutes, I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. So we have hundreds of people tuning in from across the country. I'm going to do my best to try to get to as many questions as possible. So you should see a questions box on your screen. Feel free to type in your questions throughout the fireside chat, and I will try to get to as many as possible at the end of the chat. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest for the fireside chat, Ken Shropshire. He is a little bit of everything. He is an author. He is a professor. He is a consultant. He is a CEO. He's a little bit of everything, and some have deemed him one of the smartest men in the sports industry. So tonight we are talking about sports in general, and we are talking about the intersection of race and sports. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ken. And you have a very long resume, but if you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and the work you are currently doing at Arizona State University.
Yeah, Jai, that long resume means old. That's all that means. Been around for a while, so I appreciate that. I got into the sports business straight out of law school, and I got into the sports business because I had wanted to be a professional athlete and didn't make it. I went to Stanford on a football scholarship and was not good enough. It took me 40 years to say that. So, as I stayed out there and practiced and kind of engaged and loved the people in sport, and decided to go to law school to further my career in that space. So was fortunate. As soon as I got to law school, I ended up at a law firm in LA. I was then Manad Phelps Rothenberg and Tunney. They represented about 50 baseball players. They represented the then owner of the Lakers, the Kings, and the Forum, Jack Kent Cooke. And so I got some exposure there, but I really got immersed in sport in 1982. That's why the long resume, the 80s. 1982, I got a job at the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee. The Olympics were coming to LA in 1984, so 2 years before the games, I got this job. And I was a lawyer there negotiating sponsor and licensing agreements for companies to be the official, car, bike, whatever of the games. So I did that for about a year. And then in the last year and through the games, I was actually put in charge of the sport of boxing. And those Olympics, most famously, Evander Holyfield, I think won a silver or bronze medal. And Mike Tyson didn't make those games, but he was an usher in those games. He's 16 or 17 years old. So those are kind of the characters who were there. So did that for a couple of years leading up to and through the games, and then ended up through a long process as a professor at the Wharton School, 1986. And while there, ended up doing a lot of consulting along the way. Done work for the major sports leagues, Ncaa, teams, some individual athletes. For a brief moment in there, was a sports agent, partnered with Hall of Fame tight end Kellen Winslow Sr., who had been actually a student of mine. I taught one summer at the University of San Diego Law School, and Kellen had just retired and was there, and we became friends and had a brief partnership in the sports agent business, which I'm happy to talk about at some point. It was the exposure I needed to determine it's not a business for me, but it was a wonderful experience to better understand it. Was at Wharton for 30 years, was on the cusp of retiring, then got this opportunity, and I got the opportunity. I was negotiating a deal for a guy who had been a teammate of mine in college, Ray Anderson. I was negotiating the deal for him to become the athletic director at Arizona State University. In that process, I met the president of Arizona State University. And somewhere along the way, inappropriately at first, he says, "What would it take to get you to come down here?" So, I kind of let that go. A couple of weeks later, after Ray got the job and everything was settled in, they called up again. And in what turned out to be really a 2-3 year long conversation, I was asked to lead to develop what's called the Global Sport Institute, which is a sports research institute based at Arizona State University, funded by both Arizona State and Adidas. And we research and disseminate information, focus on sport, from science stuff to social stuff across the board. So that's the 75% length version of how we got today.
Well, thank you. So my first question is, right now, kind of a pivotal time when we talk about the intersection of race and sports. Tomorrow, the NFL owners will be voting on a new provision that would expand the current Rooney Rule. Can you talk a little bit about what that provision is and whether or not you think it is a good provision, bad provision, or what can be done to ensure that there are more Black coaches in the NFL, among other positions?
I think everybody should be aware. I think the NFL, they do a lot of things well, but obviously run a sport and the popularity of it. I think what they've done very poorly this time around, and I've been involved in some conversations with some of the leadership there, is to roll out this new idea of how to improve the Rooney Rule, how to improve the hiring of, and I like to zero in on African American coaches and leadership within the league. So what the NFL should have done in this moment, I think, is, and they've done a lot of this, except a failure that this past season was tragic in terms of, and the past couple of seasons in terms of the numbers of African Americans that have been hired at the head coach position. So they realize that the Rooney Rule has not been successful and some changes have to be made. The announcement that many of you may have seen, Jai is referring to, over the weekend, I think Jim Trotter was one of the journalists and some others, set forth that the league is looking at rules that would provide incentives to hire African American head coaches. And the incentives revolved around, as the stories go, third round draft picks. That if you hire in these various positions African Americans, you will get an additional pick. If you don't properly engage in this process, you may lose some draft picks. And I think that and that may well be a proper incentive. But I think what the league missed out on is talking about everything else that they are contemplating doing to try to move the needle forward, to improve the kinds of programs that they put in place, to increase the networking that takes place so that the owners know these African American candidates in the way that they don't now. The biggest tragedy of this hiring season, in my opinion, not that this guy should have been hired, but Joe Judge, who got hired as the head coach of the New York Giants, didn't have kind of the traditional resume, was a special teams coordinator, certainly an adequate guy. But a lot of the commentary that we heard from ownership and others for people who were hired like him was that he reminds me of myself. And as an African American man, it's hard to go into a room and have the white owner across from you say, "You remind me of me." And so the comfort level is really what the league has begun to understand is the biggest problem. So to impose ways that networking occurs and there's a better understanding of who these great candidates are, that's really what the league needs to move toward. And the idea of having some penalties for not interviewing enough African Americans, for not taking steps, that may well be the incentive that's needed to motivate owners to get to know us better, which seems to be the key problem.
Definitely. So you've written several books. One book in particular that maybe one of the books you may be most well known for is a book titled In Black and White, Race and Sports in America. Can you talk a little bit about what prompted you to write that book and what were some of your key findings from writing that book?
So, I wrote that book. It ended up being published in about 1995. So I wrote it really late 80s, early 90s. And if you think of, you got to go on a time machine to think about what was going on at that time. Think about when I started writing the book, there had not been, for example, an African-American head coach in the National Football League. Art Shell had not been hired as a head coach. So there hadn't been one since Fritz Pollard, back in the leather helmet days, and a precursor to the NFL. There had not been, and actually 1999 was the first year when there was a lot of, a good number of Black agents that represented Black athletes in the 99 NFL draft. So that hadn't happened. So there were all these elements. There weren't Black owners. There weren't Black head coaches. So I had been looking at this for a while, and I had encountered some of this too, quite frankly. So as an academic, I said, well, I can write a book that looks at this closely. But as a lawyer, I can also intersperse in there what kinds of legal actions could be taken in these various circumstances to try to fix these various situations. So I had a lot of language in there. Actually, I have not looked back at that book. I pulled it out after this year's draft. Because I have a chapter in there called the White Men's Ice is Colder, talking about the lack of African Americans representing African American athletes. So I pulled out this kind of recently to look at that, but I hadn't really thought about the kinds of things I said. And then you as we kind of did a preamble to this, you mentioned you might mention the books. I glanced at it. The two big conclusions that I had about how this issue could be better, this race and sports issue could be better. One was Black ownership in sport. Think about that there had only been one moment where Peter Bine owned Bertram Lee. They owned the Denver Nuggets for a very brief time. I think it was in the 80s. But otherwise, there had been no African American ownership within Major League Sports. And now we've had Bob Johnson, Michael Jordan. We have a couple of instances where it's occurred. Sheila Johnson. And so that was one. I said this will be the answer if we have Black ownership. The other was the absence of Blacks in leadership positions in terms of coaching and otherwise. On the ownership issue, if anybody wants to look back at history, there was, Bob Johnson gets a lot of criticism, but there was kind of a magic moment when he owned what was then the Charlotte Bobcats, in terms of if you went into a top level meeting there, you would have Bob was there, the general counsel, Jared Barty was there, the team president. So you had a number of top level African Americans that were in leadership positions. So the thinking being, if you have an African American, maybe they will hire African Americans in those top level positions. Little did I contemplate that an isolated incident wouldn't make a difference in the overall. So we still have tragic numbers in the leadership levels of sport. In terms of coaching, it's been sporadic, it's been up and down, but we have not had a good number of coaches, and really the Rooney Rule again. We at the Global Sport Institute where I am, we did a 10-year study looking at this Rooney Rule problem in terms of the progress in the NFL in terms of hiring African American coaches, and that problem has not been resolved, and thus that's what we'll see a lot of tomorrow.
You've also written a book called The Business of Sports Agents. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about what you've already touched on a little bit in terms of Black agents. This past NFL draft, we saw a new record with the highest number of players being represented by Black coaches. In your opinion, is this just a trend, or do you think this is the future in terms of representation when it comes to Black agents?
Well, right, we certainly don't know yet, right? We certainly don't know if this is an aberration or if there's something special going on here. You know, I think Rich Paul alone gives us a different kind of circumstance that we didn't have before. An agent with that kind of power in general, so he gets opportunities that others have not had. Also, the presence of African Americans at some of these major firms. It's something that we did not have historically. That if you look back at the history of this, in the business of sports agents, I kind of look back trying to find the first African American agents and the success or lack of success that they had. You know, I mentioned 1999 being the last year where some of the success happened. You know, Fletcher Smith, who's still representing folks, represented Donovan McNabb, Mason Ash represented Dante Culpepper, and there were 3 or 4 other guys in that first round. So it wasn't as many as this time, but that may be the last time there was success. So if you think about it, you know, how many years ago was that? And it took this long to get another big number. But if you go back in history, if you think about people like, you know, Fred Slaughter, you know, who I consider, you know, people talk about Eugene Partner, wonderful guy, and we miss him dearly. But Fred Slaughter, who's also left us, was really the first guy to represent top level talent, mainly in the NBA. He was those who don't know Fred Slaughter, definitely Google him. He was the first. He was the center on the first John Wooden championship UCLA team, the first of the 10. He was 6'5", ended up going to law school, ended up being an assistant dean at the UCLA Law School, and he represented a number of NBA players. So you know, is this a big change moment? I mean, is this draft really something that we're going to see sustained? I would hope so, and I think, and you may have said it, a number of people have said it, and I said in the book back then, you know, that so once we this phase, then the next phase is going to be when Black agents are representing white clients on a regular basis too. So that's kind of, so there's still hurdles to get across, but let's see what happens in the upcoming drafts. I mean, so we're not there yet.
Yeah, definitely. What advice, if you could give one piece of advice to any young Black person looking to become a sports agent, what would that one piece of advice be?
It is a marathon. Be present. I mean, and in your career that you've gotten going, it is. Some people have the quick instant hit. I mean, some people get that big client right away. I mean, you know, a good friend of mine in Hollywood represents, you know, Chris Tucker, and kind of that is her client. I mean, you can end up with the one client that gets you where you need to be, but it can take time also. And so I always say it is a marathon. It is, you know, go to the conferences. For African Americans, don't just go to BSLA. Go to BSLA, but don't just go to BSLA. Go to everything. You know, go to any place where people begin to say, oh, this person is an entertainment lawyer. This person is a sports lawyer. Whoever it is you are trying to be. foundationally, and my son, by the way, so this is all fresh in my mind in terms of thinking, is going to Penn to the law school next year, and he's a former athlete and all that sort of thing. So this contemplation of how do you get into sports is something that's fresh in my mind. One key too is make sure you are some kind of lawyer. Don't call yourself, I say call yourself a sports lawyer, but make sure you are a litigator or corporate or tax, that you have some skill that somebody actually can utilize. Because the idea of all the sports law cases, that can be of value at some point. It can be of value if you teach a sports law course. But when somebody has a tax problem, or somebody's about to be incarcerated, or somebody wants to form a corporation, they want somebody who can do that kind of work for them. So the key thing, the key word I'd leave people with is sustainability. Once you decide to engage in this space, don't stop. Don't stop, because it is the path of success is littered with all these people that dropped out along the way, and they said this is not going to work. And next thing you know, you look around, and I'm still laughing at your introduction. People calling you one of the smartest people in sports, which is certainly, you didn't ask anybody. No transcripts have to be revealed today, anything like that. Right? So, but longevity is important. Longevity makes a difference.
Definitely. So my next question is, because you've seen kind of all these different issues in sports and various facets of the sports industry, as a lawyer by trade, if you could enact one rule or one law pertaining to the sports industry, whether at the collegiate level or professional level, what would that one law or rule be?
So rule, and this is what we're in the midst of now, in terms of this whole amateurism question. I mean, it's fascinating to me. You mentioned the early books, or the first book I wrote was one called Agents of Opportunity, which was a precursor to the business of sports agents. And that book talks a lot about amateurism. And that book, I think in the late 80s. And think of a moment in time when the myth of amateurism was in full force. The idea that there was a celebration of some ancient society that didn't exist, that participated in sport for the glorious sport, and they ran around with fig leaves and sort of all this stuff. That imagery and the idea that Olympic athletes could not receive any compensation was deeply entrenched. And it took years before people really started to understand it, and that became something that hurdle didn't have to be crossed anymore. The idea that it was okay for any athlete to be compensated for their value became something people began to accept. I mean, the last barrier, and this is where the rule comes in, is the Ncaa. But the last location, and all these name, image, and likeness changes that are about to come about are indicative of the understanding of the change that can be made. So the next step is that everybody, and this is the kind of true believer in the system, and if you are a lawyer, you have to believe this. Everybody deserves representation as soon as they need it. So the idea that at any of these last barriers that are there, that say the kid coming out of high school that has 500,000 followers on Instagram that wants to monetize that, shouldn't have to figure that out on his or her own. They should be able to have representation as soon as possible, and that should not negatively impact their possibility of participating in sport at the collegiate level. So that space, that's kind of the last barrier of rules. And well, being said, we've talked about race a lot. This is most likely to impact African Americans. This is, and it's somehow, if you think about all the sports stuff that goes on, you've got the age limitation problems for the NBA and the NFL, but for golf, tennis, kind of the non-traditional African American sports, you can play, go pro whenever you want to, and nobody's, and I think of the shameful things that happen to some of these kids in these other sports, but nobody's pushing to say there needs to be a moment in time that you've got to spend in college before you can become a a professional and the like. So to me, it is, in a phrase, an old economics degree, old Wharton guy, it's open market. And I know all the problems that can emerge with an open market, but that's the period of time we need to go through to get things balanced out to where they need to be.
Okay, definitely. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit and play a game that I did not prepare you for. So what I'm going to do is I am going to start a sentence, and I want you to finish that sentence just using one word. So the first sentence is, Colin Kaepernick is...
Gutsy.
Michael Jordan is...
See, I really want to say a lot more to that.
Okay. We'll move to another one.
Difficult. How about that?
Okay. Black ownership in the NFL will...
Is not improve one word?
We can make it one. Okay. The Rooney Rule is...
Antiquated.
The future of Black agents is...
I got 2 words for everything.
Okay, we can go 2 words.
Looking up.
Okay, that works. Okay, so we have a ton of questions that have already come in. And so I want to make sure we have time to get through all these questions because it's a lot of them. But before I start getting to the questions from the audience, I want to ask you, what else do you have coming down the pipeline, and how can people who are tuned in right now support the work you're doing?
Well, the key thing that I would love for people to do is to follow the work of the Institute. Go to @Global Sport Matters, @Global Sport MTRS, @Global Sport MTRS. I mean, that's where you will see the results of the research that we're doing. That's where you will see some of the latest stories that we have. And actually starting June 1st, we will have a refreshed web presence that's going to bring a lot of surprises, and we're going to have a lot of polls, a lot of documentaries, and a lot of great stories. But right now, if you follow us on Twitter at Global Sport Matters, you'll get an idea of the kinds of things we're thinking about, the kinds of sessions we've had. We had a great session just this past Friday, and many of you kind of hit the evening news a little bit on Native American communities and the effect of COVID-19. This Friday, we are looking at social activism issues in COVID-19, and then the next week we're looking at the impact in Latin America. So do follow those, and you'll a lot of my personal stuff will be there as well, but at Global Sport Matters.
Great, awesome. So the first question I have is, who were some of the people you were able to reach out to for help or knowledge when you were working your way up in the industry?
You know, I mentioned Fred Slaughter. So think about it. He was, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ahead of me. And I actually I went to Columbia Law School. He actually had gone to Columbia as well. You know, I remember distinctly, and think about this. So this is in the 70s. You know, no cell phones, no email. I may have written him a letter, and he responded to me, and he said, and I mean, as I think about how I did, I might have been the first or second year, wrote him a letter and said, hey, I'm interested in the sports. I want to be a sports agent. He actually got back to me, which you know, just taught me tons about him and how to react to people over the years. I've always tried to get back to people. Hope nobody's going to ask a question and say I didn't get back to them, but I always try to get back to people as a result. And he said, I'm coming to New York He was based in LA. I'm coming to New York to negotiate a deal with Pony, the shoe company at the time, for, I think it was Gus and Ray Williams, kind of two NBA brothers. So he was one, and the other one that I've got to mention, who's still added a bit, but was one of the real stars in this, Bill Strickland. So Bill Strickland, who was at ProServe, seeing the Jordan documentary, Bill was, maybe enough credit, he was right there as Jordan's representative with David Falk. So there was an African American that was deeply involved in that. Bill's always been very forthcoming. The last one I want to mention is kind of a pioneer, this Charlie Grantham, who was the head of the NBA Players Association. He was the first African American to lead a Players Association, and he was always very helpful in terms of here are the things you need to do. I can name some more. A law professor who became the head of the NLRB, Bill Gould at Stanford University. He taught me, I went back to Stanford for my third year of law school, but he really impressed upon me that issue that I raised earlier. You got to be a good lawyer. So he really got me focused on labor law in a way that I had not before.
Awesome. Next question is, what is a way that one looking for a job in the sports industry might go about bringing value to an agent when they do not currently work for them or their firm?
And many of you won't be surprised by this answer. Bring a client. I mean, that really, for some, it's, you're the brother of or the cousin of, that sort of thing. But the idea that you have access. So for the agent business, access is going to be the key. And if you can bring a client, or if you have great prospects at bringing a client, that can be something that's attractive to an agent, that will give you the opportunity. And you got to structure it the right way, where you get the experience that you want to get, that you're able to provide whoever you have the relationship with, and make sure they receive the best service possible. But that is often the best way. And I mean, the second best path is to volunteer, to be an intern, and to be willing to do any kind of work. I remember I offered while I was in law school to work for an agent for free, and it turned out the agent had a lot of traditional legal work, so I ended up doing real estate and all kinds of other stuff while the agent did the fun sports stuff. So that's part of it too, is to be willing to do the other work, and then to get the exposure when the opportunity sets itself forth for you.
Awesome. Next question is, how do you see relationships with agents and collegiate athletes changing with the new NCAA rules being enacted? What opportunities and pitfalls will this present for agents, specifically new agents?
Well, yeah, pitfalls is going to be the key. Make sure you understand the rules. It's the traps that are out there. The two basic traps are certainly the NCAA regulations, which are not necessarily against the law, and then the state regulations, whatever state you are practicing in, and whatever state you're recruiting in, and whatever state the athlete might end up in. The three key ones to be aware of. So be very careful about the rules. Be very careful about the service that you provide. It should open up more and more. It's opened up more and more. As I said, I'm an advocate of being able to provide counsel as early as possible. So keep an eye on that. And that's going to be the avenue of opportunity. And it really is for the name, image, and likeness openings that may arrive. It really is going to be within athletic departments. Maybe you can be the lawyer that says, I can help each of these student athletes figure out how to monetize what they have, whether it's followers, whether it's they want to set up camps, whatever it might be, that you can help them out with those things. The barriers and the confusion, and we don't know for sure. Can you also help them out with things like endorsement deals with the local auto dealership? Those kinds of deals, it's not clear those are going to be allowed. So it is more the social media type stuff that looks like it's what's going to be allowed readily. So if you can get some expertise in that, that's going to be a big space for development.
Next question is, what professional membership groups can I join to meet with others in the sports industry?
So sports for lawyers, you got to join the Sports Lawyers Association. So I'm one of the things that I've done over the years, president of the Sports Lawyers Association. I've been on the board for years. I will say that many of my deepest relationships over the years, again, I said you got to be there, you got to be present. I mean, I've been going to sports lawyers conferences since they were founded, which is kind of a long time since, again, the early 80s. And so there are people in there that I've known forever. In some of these conversations I've been having about the Rooney Rule, for example, the African American members that have been there for a long time, we talk about these kinds of issues too that aren't necessarily things that we can monetize, but are things that we need to do to better the industry for African Americans. So it's a great organization. Sports Lawyers Association is the largest organization of sports lawyers in the world. The global component has grown over the years, but certainly domestically, you can't be at a better place. And it's unfortunate, again, like so many things, the conference did not take place this year, but definitely look to attend next year and look to engage in the programming that's online as well.
Definitely. Next question is, what are some of the questions a person should ask themselves while attempting to advance and pursue this profession?
Well, for one, if you're thinking about the agent side, you have to really think about, do you want to be an agent? Is that a life? Is that the life you want to lead? I'll tell you a little story that should have been more revealing to me in the moment, and I still, continue to pursue the idea of representing men and women. When I was at Manat Phelps, the law firm in LA, another young lawyer, a year ahead of me, was a guy named Ncaa, who's now the president of the Detroit Pistons. He was a very successful agent in both basketball and baseball. And we were both young and hoping for more sports work and couldn't get it. We were hoping that the firm that had the 50 baseball players and all the other stuff would give us more work. We'd get some, but it was really on the tangent. And one day he came to me, Arntel, and said, "Hey, let's go down to Florida and sign some baseball players." And I'm like, "Well, that's not in the plan. Nobody said we were supposed to do that." And he just went. And he ended up signing. I wish I could remember the name of the player. He signed that player, and then he was off for the races. I mean, he was off, and then very successful. And I realized my personality was not such that I wanted to pursue men and women in that kind of way. That I didn't have the personality to do that. But there were other things that I did well. There were other segments of sport where I could be successful. And as I said, ended up doing these more corporate deals with the LA Olympics, ended up more in the management role, and then more of these diversity issues and legal issues and other things along the way. Ended up, going back at it again, as I mentioned, with Kellen Winslow Sr. And again, I found myself doing things that I wasn't exactly comfortable with in terms of pursuing potential clients. So it's something you have to think about. You have to really understand, and the sports space is so large. I mean, you can figure out where you fit, but don't try to force it with the career choices that are maybe most popular. That there's a lot of success that you can have.
Next question is, what are some of your thoughts on diversity initiatives for college student athletes?
In terms of, should we have more or what?
I'm not sure. We can ask the person who asked the question.
Okay.
And I'll move on to the next question while they elaborate.
Okay.
Okay, the next question is, how do you convince the young Black athlete to hire Black agents, lawyers, and financial representatives?
Well, that is the age-old question. That's what not my first book, was one of my early books were about. That is the dilemma. I think part of what we've seen. Why did we see success this year? Why have we seen success in the past? In the past, Donovan McNabb, maybe one of the first big name guys to be a top pick, to be represented by an African American. Interestingly, his parents were deeply involved in that selection process. Barry Sanders, who was a top pick, represented by Lamont Smith and David Ware. Same thing. I actually quoted my book from Barry's father saying, I didn't raise this boy all these years not to be in the hands of another Black man. I mean, it was really, really kind of impactful the way that he said that. And then to kind of see Barry hand his son off to Stanford University in this past signing session to a Black head coach. So you know there's something deeper going on there. I think as we've seen, in this modern era, the steps that LeBron took to empower people who had been with him his entire life. That to me is one of the keys that's there. So, first of all, the trust, and then for the men that he trusted to actually become competent enough to lead in the way that they have. And I think that imagery is really going to help a lot in that sense. But for anybody, the person asking the question, the key is to be prepared. And if you are not prepared, to partner with someone who can get the job done and deliver the best service possible.
Next question is, what are your thoughts on racial disparities as it pertains to esports?
So I haven't looked at esports that closely, but I did about 3 years ago. Was involved. There was an opportunity to discuss the idea of and how Villegas ended up being this person to discuss representing the players, to represent the union. And it was that time where I understood the racial makeup of most of the esports participants. And in that moment, again, I'm a couple years off. I mean, the idea of how many, I guess it was largely from South Korea, how many Asian participants there were in the sport. So in terms of participation as athletes, I don't know what the incentives could be. I don't, of all these sports, I would say not just on esports. I am not a big advocate of sport participation aspiration for us. So I don't know if it's any different that I want somebody to aspire to play in the NBA as I want them to aspire to participate in esports. In terms of leadership, in terms of legal representation, I think we have the same problems that we have in all these other areas, and then to top it off, we don't have the connector to say, well, look at all the people on the field of play. Shouldn't there be representation and leadership that looks like the people on the field of play? So it's more difficult, but shouldn't make any difference. I mean, again, it's another space where if we are competent and if we pursue the opportunities, we should get those opportunities at the same rate as anyone else. So again, it's a matter of preparation and finding the opportunity.
Next question is, on the NCAA level, how do we overcome the lack of minority leadership in athletic departments, such as athletic directors, to provide a higher consideration of minorities for head coach positions and opportunities?
Yeah, now I'm glad to see Martin Germán, the athletic director job at UCLA. It's interesting how few of these jobs that we have, especially at the Power 5 level. My guy Ray Anderson at Arizona State is another good representation. It is much like the GM job or the manager job in baseball or the head coach job in football. Many people are prepared for that job. There are a lot, especially as you branch out of the traditional paths, that you've got people from business coming in and taking the job. So there again is no excuse, and it varies even more severely in terms of what can be done to try to move that needle. When I say that, in the NFL, you can have the Rooney Rule. You can say you've got to interview. This is a private enterprise, private association, so you can impose rules like that. With these universities, so many of them are state institutions, and you've got to comply with state laws, which will not allow an imposition of employment practices that mandate that you interview particular groups. That the reverse discrimination possibilities come into full play in some of these state institutions. So it is a state by state problem, and I always say, there's one place to look if you really want to try to bring about change at any institution, and that's at the very top. So at colleges, it is that college president, it is the board of trustees, it is the chancellor, it is communication with those people to make that decision to hire a person of color as an athletic director. And then, we're taking a leap here. That person will have less unconscious bias in their hiring, and they will make decisions to hire head coaches at a greater rate, head coaches of color at a greater rate than we traditionally see.
Next question. Is it true that Black athletes still have a trust factor with Black sports agents?
I don't know. That's, yeah, again, in the in Black and White book, I mean, kind of, whimsically, I couldn't wait to, put in print the Malcolm X white man's ice is colder kind of thinking it, and to talk through it some and to articulate it and to, I actually quote again my former business partner Kellen Winslow in the book, and he talks about, he came out, he was a first round pick, how he felt like he had to have that white Jewish lawyer. So think about this, is in the late, early 80s. So it wasn't uncommon thinking. Have we turned a corner to realize you need to find the best person for you, whoever that might be, and the best person for you should be the person who is most qualified and you have the greatest connection with. So that's the corner we have always been seeking to turn. And then back to your earlier question, Jai, we'll see if this draft, the NFL draft, was a moment where we've seen that corner turn.
Next question is, someone asked, how do you approach volunteering for an agency or agent to be taken seriously?
Yeah, no, it's tough, and it's probably the best path is to have some form of writing outlining what the task will be, and to take the burden to do that yourself. I think in all these settings, whether it's a formal internship where you get someone to say, I'll take you on for 10 weeks or whatever it might be, or a shadowing opportunity. And the thing that you have to think of mind as a young lawyer, or as someone who's in law school, or whatever the setting might be, you want to make it as easy as possible for that person that you're asking to allow you to shadow, to allow you to intern, to bring you in, to allow to make yourself an asset, but not someone who's a burden, who's looking up every day saying, well, what am I going to do today? That you find ways to be helpful, that you say, I will straighten out the books on your bookshelf, and while you're doing that, you get a chance to see what is this great sports entertainment lawyer reading. So you take advantage of the moment. You pay attention to what's going on. You offer to help in different circumstances where maybe you weren't asked to help. So that to me is the key, that you're coming in a way that you want to assist, that you're an asset, that you're not a burden.
Next question is, if you were a high school student in 2020, how would you proceed and excel in the current future sports landscape?
So in the era of COVID-19, I mean, that's the first thing I think about what's special. We always try to frame this in terms of challenges and opportunities and not negatively. But I think there's some great kinds of quotes from former prisoners of war, where you have to accept the inevitability of where you are and what you're confronted with, but at the same time strive to be successful. So the idea that you are graduating from high school in this moment, and it is, make no mistake about it, there has not been another moment like this in time. How can I continue to be successful? What steps can I take to be successful in this time? Part of it's going to be, how are you going to be able to explain what you did in this moment? If you don't get to start college on time, or if you don't get the internship that you wanted, that you read what books, that you wrote what papers, you did what in the moment, you started a blog, there's something that you can control, and so it really is that old saying, just control the things that you can control, and what you want to control is that you've been successful in this period of time, where it was difficult for some people, and some people, you're going to be the one. You're not going to be the one that went in the corner and said, this is terrible. You're going to be the one that acknowledged this is problematic, but you took some steps to be successful.
Great advice. Next question is, what resources would you recommend to learn more about the sports industry? Books, podcasts, etc. Obviously all of your books that you've written. Aside from that.
check them out. Yes, it's fun. I do think, again, I'll push Global Sport Matters. I'm going to push that, especially starting June 1. We will have a new kind of setup. I listen to the lead every day. I mean, that I think is a. I also listen to the Sports Business Journal podcast and read every Sports Business Journal publication, both the journal and the daily. And those can be a little costly, so if you can find a way to get your hands on those. But whatever regular practice you can have. In my day, growing up, and it's funny, I don't do it as frequently as I used to do, but I would read the sports section of my local paper, the New York Times, USA Today, and kind of scatter around and see what else there was that I should have my hands on. But again, the whole idea of regular practice of doing these things, regularly staying on top, and so those are the things I look at most often.
Next question is, do you think the Black family involved in athletics is keen on Black representation and empowering Blacks economically?
It varies. I mean, we can't paint the Black family universally, and I think, again, thinking back, that may have been one of my big surprises as I would go into, in the period of time that I was going to Black homes and have that conversation, to try to have that connection. And I think, frankly, those families that think it's important, that will come across. Those who don't, there's not going to be a way you can move that needle. So it's difficult to know how much of a sales pitch to make that. I think that today the best sales pitch is going to be the competency. And if you connect with someone and you start talking about the issues that are important to the community, then all the better. But to presume it can end up being problematic.
Next question is, what are your thoughts on designing diversity and inclusion educational programs for college student athletes? What do you feel would be important topics to focus on?
For student athletes specifically, in some sense, no different from any other student. I mean, so like age and knowledge base. For the differentiation may be to make sure, and I think for anybody, and there's a lot of conversation about what education should athletes get, for them to understand the sports industry and to understand the landscape in terms of diversity in the sports industry and the inclusion in the sports industry, where the problems lie. As I've had these conversations about the Rooney Rule with a lot of people and about things that didn't happen this last time. The great Bill Rhoden, I'll give him credit for it, said really not going to have any change in the space until the athletes themselves step up and demand it. And it's interesting to think about that. And for sure, if that becomes, we've seen, from Magic Johnson to Kobe to Jordan, the power that people are going to have over the hiring and firing of coaches. So that understanding, so that level of understanding of the absence of diversity and the power that the athletes can have if they are that successful, that should certainly be part of the conversation as well.
So this is a good question. How would you grade Jay-Z in his role working with the NFL to date?
The complexity of that question is the following: I don't know exactly what Jay-Z has been responsible for or not, and that may be part of the aura of the deal. I think the way the deal was struck, and again, as reported, the absence of conversation with Kaepernick and Eric Reed and Kenny Stills and guys who were still kneeling, I think that was problematic. My conversations with some of those guys is that they did not have an engaged conversation before this happened, before he came on board, and essentially said, again, whimsically in a press conference maybe, that we got to go beyond kneeling, while these guys were still risking their careers, and Kaepernick was out from kneeling. What's he been responsible from there? Was the $80-90 million that deal was already done. So I think it remains to be seen. And I think I applaud him for engaging and utilizing his power. I applaud anybody for striking a great business deal for themselves. So let's see where it goes.
Okay. Next question is, what is your opinion on how to better stimulate interest in HBCU athletics, as well as draw more recruits to choose HBCUs?
Yeah, that's a tough question. For a moment, what is now the PCL, the Professional College League, was originally the HBL, Historic Basketball League, which was going to tie in and uplift HBCUs. There has got to be a path that allows them to be more successful. I think some of the moment in time when there was urging of more high-level recruits to go to HBCUs. I think that's still a possibility. I think there's still some paths that could bring that about. But I think as things settle out, this, without March Madness, maybe without college football this year, it's going to be interesting to see how HBCUs play in all this. Those revenue streams are not as important for those schools as they are for the majority schools. So the HBCUs are already ahead of the game in finding paths to have revenue come into sport without those. So maybe some good will come out of this bad moment for the HBCUs.
Yeah, hopefully. And that is actually our last question. It is time. Well, it's not the last question. It's the last question I'm getting to. There's still tons of other questions, but I know we only agreed to 1 hour of your time. So before we go, can you share, people want to learn more about the work you're doing or follow you on social, can you share that information?
Sure. I mean, again, if you go through at Global Sport Managers, at Global Sport MTRS, just follow that on Twitter. You'll find me. I'm at Ken Shropshire on Twitter. My dog's calling me now. This moment in time is one where we're putting out a lot of information. I mean, I think it's a very critical time for all of us. But feel free to reach out anytime. Anybody I can be helpful with, happy to do so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for imparting all of your knowledge and sharing all of your thoughts on all these different topics. And hopefully maybe we can do it again sometime soon. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We will have a playback that will be available after today. So thank you all, and thanks, Ken, for doing this.
Thank you, Jai. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.